Okay guys, this is part 2 of installing my oil pressure gauge and my water temperature gauge. So in part 2, I'm actually going to install the sensors that go in the engine. This is the oil pressure sensor and the attachment that came with from Cravenspeed in the kit. And this is the piece that goes for the water insert to replace the hose, and this is the sensor for the water temperature. So I'm going to try to follow the directions that came online for Cravenspeed. So we'll see how close they follow. Are we going through it? Some of it's a little bit different. So let's go ahead and get started. Basically, you just need a whole bunch of different types of torque wrenches and sockets, so I'll go through them and see what size they are as I'm doing it. Okay, in the first step they say is go ahead and take off the windshield wipers and basically lift this up, and there's a 13 millimeter underneath there, so that way you can take off this plastic shroud. And for that, there's going to be two screws on either side, and that uses a 10 for that side and that whole piece of plastic, because what they want to do is, they said the easiest way is to follow the hood latch cable to get it back inside for the wires for the sensor. So let me go ahead and pull that off. Oh, before you go ahead and pull these off, I took the nuts off. Before you pull that off, they recommend go ahead and put some tape to mark where the wipers go, so that way when you reinstall it, you'll know it'll get at the same spot that you had it before. So the hardest one was to take the one off on the driver's side, and I did that with the hood off, which was easier. And if you fold your wipers up, so that way the spring is not putting pressure on the glass to cause it to bind when you're trying to pull it off. So there's a couple of tips right there. I don't know, they're both identical, but keep track of which one is passenger side, which is that one for me, and driver's side, which is that one. Okay, to be able to take them off, you got to take off that rubber seal for the hood that usually runs along the edge here, so you can pop it off. Then on this one, you got to disconnect the washer hose before you pop the other one off. Okay, there it is with the shroud removed, and I think I understand their directions. They want you to run the wire from the sensors through where the brake cables are coming through there to the first firewall. Then that will end up coming inside here into this compartment. Then if you look at the cable, this is the cable for the hood, then they want you to probably squeeze it through that grommet that goes to that firewall to the underneath the driver side. So let's go ahead and do the sensors now. Okay, there's this is a non-turbo, so actually in their directions they're talking about a turbo one. So they're talking about moving the air intake, intercooler, the intake pipe for the hose for the intercooler. So there's the oil, so mine's not, so I don't have to do that. So there's the oil filter, and I believe that's it right there. The oil pressure sensor, which is this right here, that I'm going to take out. So this is not a squeeze to unplug, this is a lift. So you lift this tab and it slides out. Okay, to be able to get a 24 millimeter socket on that, I had to move this out of the way. So basically you unplug this, which allows you to slide this up off its bracket in the back here, and then just scoot it out of the way, just enough room to be able to get in there. I just need to get a wrench in there now. Okay, to make my life easier, I disconnected this hose here, so I can put an extension and work with the wrench on this side, And I cut the tie on here, that way there's a little more slack in this thing, because I end up going with a socket underneath it by raising it up. Okay, here's the sensor out. They said make sure you keep it clean. You don't want to get dirty, so wrap it in a rag, and you don't want to make sure you don't break it because you're going to reuse this, otherwise you have to buy another one. You'll notice there's an O-ring on the end there, on the seal. So now I'm going to prep the adapter that goes in there. Okay, this is what comes in the kit. With the gauge, you get your oil pressure sensor. It's rated for 24 to 33 ohms, 0 to 100 psi. There you go. So you got ground and signal. They don't give you these female push-on connectors, so you gotta go buy some. This is 0.25 for the signal, and for the ground, it's a smaller one. It's a 0.187. I got this at Pep Boys, these connectors. So what they tell you to do is go ahead and plug all these up with Teflon tape and the plugs, so that way after you screw it on, you can see which hole would be the best to use, and then you go ahead and take that one out and then put this adapter in there, and then screw this into that adapter. In the instructions that they have on Cravenspeed, they actually, I think in the old one, they have old instructions which they actually have a hose. They run a hose, a metal hose along the front of the engine down to the side before they attach this. So I think they realized that you don't need that hose. If you just include this little adapter, you'll be able to get this on at the right angle and not interfere with anything. So let me go ahead and put some Teflon tape and plug up the holes. So here it is, one of the plugs. I did 4 wraps, and what I'm using is this Purple Monster thread tape, Teflon tape. So I do 4 wraps just to make sure. Okay, here it is. All the holes plugged up. The old sensor will go back on here. This is the one that's going to screw into the engine. Don't forget to put the O-ring on. Comes with an O-ring. Make sure you put some oil on that so that way it's pre-lubed. Go ahead and lube it. And then whichever hole lines up best, I would take that plug out, put some Teflon tape on this, and insert this, and then screw this onto that. So let me go ahead and put the O-ring on, get some oil on the O-ring, and then put this back on the engine. Okay, there's actually a little groove in there where the O-ring seats in. So after you got some oil and your new oil on your O-ring, go ahead and drop it in that seat and press it till it fits. Okay, there it is. The adapter's on. For some reason, I could not find a torque number for that. But looking up on the internet, couldn't find it in my manual, could look up on the internet. For other BMWs, for this oil pressure switch, is about 20 foot-pounds or 100 inch-pounds. So that, I remember taking it off, it did not take a lot to take it off. So that probably sounds about right because it has an O-ring as a seal, not a tapered edge, not tapered threads. So if you don't have can't get in there to torque it, just torque it till it's snug. Don't over tighten it. Okay, I can see I'm already going to get interference between screwing this back on the end of this and hitting this. So I'll have to figure out a work around that to be able to get the old sensor back on to the end. Okay, this is what I ended up with. This is routed underneath the sensor. See if I get some better lighting here. So to be able to get the old oil pressure switch sensor back on, I routed underneath. So obviously this can't go back onto the bracket that's this bracket right here, because it's too far away. This I could still snap back in. I was able to plug this in, the oil pressure switch. This one I cut the tie wrap to give it a little more slack. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a spacer. There's a gap, about that big of a gap between the metal and that. I'm gonna put this in there and tie wrap it in there. So that way it doesn't, it's a little bit tighter and it doesn't wiggle around. Okay, that's what I have. If you see down in there, that's that rubber spacer I put in. Then I just tie wrap that. I go cut those tie wraps, but that holds it pretty steady, and there's not pressure onto this switch, this plastic part, so you don't want that to have pressure on it and vibrate and snap that. So let me take out one of the plugs and put in the new pressure sensor, oil pressure sensor. Okay, after you take the plug out, make sure you look down into the adapter to make sure there's no loose Teflon sitting down in there. If you do, go ahead and pick it out. I just used a long pick to reach down there and pick up any loose Teflon. So I got Teflon on this, the adapter, so I'm going to go ahead, this piece, I'll go ahead and put that on. So this fits about a 9/16 wrench. So measure that before I start putting it on. Okay, I had to switch between a 9/16 and a 17 millimeter to be able to get that brass piece on. So now I'm going to put this on. That's the angle. Let's see if I can get it. That's the angle, and then I'm going to screw this on, and this one takes an 18 millimeter. Put this one on. Put some Teflon tape on it too. Okay, there's the sensor hooked up. I started it up just to make sure there's no leaks. So far so good. Looks like I don't have any leaks. So next job is put the water temperature sensor on. Hopefully that's a lot easier and not as cramped. So the connection I want to get to is underneath this. So they said siphon the antifreeze out of that and go ahead and loosen it up. Okay, that's what I'm after, is that piece right there, to go ahead and change that out with the other fitting. So put something underneath the car because I might lose some antifreeze as I take that piece off. Okay, there it is. Took out this piece. Just squeeze the clamps, slide them off. You're not going to use these hose clamps anymore. They give you some. So I'm going to end up replacing this piece with this piece. Now this piece, the temperature sensor plugs into here. If you had an automatic, you would have an adapter that connects here to a hose, but I would put a plug. They give you a plug to plug this up because I have a manual transmission. Okay, Teflon tape. Plug since I have a manual, water temperature sensor, all installed. Give you some new hose clamps, install the hose clamps, and I should be able to just install this in. Okay, new one installed. I used an 8 millimeter to tighten that, and I used an 8 millimeter to take off that nut there. So remember to refill your antifreeze before you start. Okay. Here's my made up wires. I use orange and black for the oil pressure sensor, and black and white for the water temperature because that's what's already there. And they actually give you the these bullet type crimps, whereas the spade ones, the flat ones, you have to get some of those to fit the sensor. So actually I'm going to twist this and put a braid over it and run it through the engine. Okay, in case you didn't know how to do this, to twist two wires or more wires, then put one end in a vise, hook the other side to your drill, and turn it, and it twists the wire. And that's how you get a twisted pair. Okay, so I'm going to use the ground here to connect for these things. So I didn't buy a big enough ring terminal, but this is my harness that I'm making up. This is the one that goes to the water temperature. I fished out the negative out through the braid. Then I'm going to tape this up and then put a ring terminal on this end so I can connect to here. Then the rest of it is going to go inside the car. Okay, here's the wire routed. Here's this one for the oil pressure, and here's the one come from the water temperature underneath the reserve. Around along here. These are my two grounds that I'm going to connect to this. I need to get some ring terminals. Put some ground on that. Then actually this is plastic, so I'm going to go and drill a hole through here and put a grommet and run it through there. Okay, here's the plastic hole. I didn't put a grommet because I have the sheathing on it. I went ahead and used a piece of cut off plastic tie that I'm going to try to feed through the same hole that's used for the hood release and feed the two wires through. Okay, I connected both grounds to one ring terminal, which I'll screw back into there, into the space, and then work on getting the wire into the car. Okay, decided to go a different route. Instead of trying to feed it through the brake cable, grommet up here, I went ahead and took off this cover because I could see that the massive amount of wires underneath. You drop off that kick panel underneath with the 3 screws underneath the driver's side, then you can see that way up in there. Basically just carefully stick a screwdriver underneath the little tab and just lift it up a little bit. Screwdriver lift up the tab, which releases it. There's 3 of them to do. And what's cool is I can see that there's a place to, if I open this, cut this off, this little knobby thing, I could feed it right through there. Because I think that was for, depending on what kind of model car you had, you might need more wiring. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, there you go. I made a little hole in that little rubber piece here, which wasn't being used for anything. And I can just kind of feed this down and see if I can find it on the other side. I can't get you a shot of looking way up there, but basically when I was able to push this through, I could just reach up in there and feel it. You'll see a big bundle of wire coming in, and that's where you'll find this wire. Okay, there it is with the cover back on. I ran it underneath where the other cables go, and that should be fine. The wires I only cut about 4 feet long, but actually it looks like they should actually be longer, probably 6-7 feet. Just make sure you have no slack to get all the way up to the top. I'll probably go ahead and splice in to make them longer. So if you if you want them long enough, probably go ahead and do your leads about 6-7 feet long. If you have a broken battery door where kind of like it's not holding up here anymore, so there's a good time to go ahead and put tape on the back side, and you can use that as a hinge to hold it, to open and close it, and that way you'll have a tape seam on the underside. Okay, here's it all buttoned backed up. Antifreeze put back in the reserve. This is reading 1.74 ohms on the water and 244.45 ohms on the oil pressure. So it looks like I got continuity, everything looks good. So part 3 is going to be installing the gauges inside the car and doing all the wiring inside the car. So Hopefully I'll get to that in the next couple of days. I'm waiting for some parts to come in, but thanks for watching. Hope this helps.